Howdy, howdy. We are live on a Friday night with yet another Back-Trekking Retrospective. And we have Dave, or Ambassador Dave, as I should say, back on
It's
board.
pretty exciting to have a title. I'll take it.
So, well, it was either that or like Prime Dipshit, or I had like a running list. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
think it's the better of the
Im-
two of those.
Impresario was on there.
I don't
A
have
few
enough
options,
attitude
but
to be like, what's his name? Who was the dipshit from Chicago?
oh yeah, Captain Shaw. So,
Yeah, I can't match that. I
the
can't do
dipshit from Round Rock.
that.
Some
Ambassador is better.
Some
Yeah.
Austin slash Williamson County humor that no one watching this will probably get, but that's okay. I see that we have Joel here in the live audience, so let's just go ahead and get this show started. I'm Fatheree,
This is Dave.
And I'm Miss Taylor.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 321st installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek, old and new. And tonight we are discussing Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 20, Heart of Glory. So this is part of our series of what we call Back-Trekking Retrospectives, where we take a look back at some specific episodes of older legacy Star Trek shows. We did Spock's Brain last week, and we have another episode planned for next week. I'll be announcing what it is at the end of the show, but it is not from the original series or The Next Generation. It'll be a different show. And Joel will be on board for that. So stick around to the end of the show, and I'll let y'all know what we're watching and discussing next week. But this week it is Heart of Glory, teleplay by Maurice Hurley, story by Maurice Hurley and Herbert, Wright, and DC Fontana, directed by Rob Bowman, no relation. And I'll dive into that in 1 second. Just a little bit of housekeeping, per usual. I need to give a big, huge thank you and shout out to the wonderful Tex-Trek Patreon supporters. We couldn't have made it to 321 shows without you. Thank you so very much. Starfleet So Hell, Cake is Eternal, Crazy Dutchie, Joanne Robertson, John Dot, Geek Filter, Quark Spar, Stephanie Durantes, Matthew Averett, Braxton, Chuck A, Joel Vallis, Ben Gideum, Arthur Lamoureux, our associate producer Chris Garris, Dave Farabee, Dave A. Gregory, Ulysses the Pagan, and our anonymous supporters. We like to celebrate with our patrons once a month with a Patreon watch party, and the next one is scheduled for next weekend, Saturday, March 22nd. It is going to be an animated double feature. We're going to be watching the animated series episode, The Eye of the Beholder. It's where the Enterprise crew get put in the zoo that belong to the slug aliens, and you have like little slug alien junior up on the Enterprise causing trouble with Scotty, so that's kind of fun. That sounds so dumb trying to describe it to refresh it for people, but
I mean,
Star Trek is weird.
A lot of Star Trek does if you just lay it out without context.
Yeah, and the animated series especially can get bonkers, though. So, but it'll be a double feature. We're doing The Eye of the Beholder, and that's going to be followed by Let Sleeping Borg Lie. That one's easy to recall. That's the Prodigy episode where they find some sleeping Borg. So,
It's a good episode.
It is. I think those will be an interesting pairing. But thanks, Joel, for coming up with those. We'll be watching those Saturday, March 22nd at 3:30 p.m. Central Time. And if there's anyone who supports on Patreon at the Bridge Crew tier or higher, if you have a birthday in April, please make sure that I know about it. We're going to have some additional streams for birthdays too. We're doing those a little different now. Those are like open to the public. So if you support the Bridge Crew or higher and it's your birthday, we can have a watch party in Discord and everyone's invited. So looking forward to having some of those. I know we have a lot of May birthdays, so we don't have any in April, but we're going to have several in May. And
if they overlap in May, they're going to have to fight Vulcan style.
Well, that's why we're doing it different now, because like it used to just kind of replace the monthly watch party, but then like if there's multiple birthdays, it's like, you know, it's just easier to be like, oh, we'll just make that like an extra thing on top of the monthly watch parties. But
very magnanimous.
Before we get into a Heart of Glory, one little news item I want to bring up, but that is that Taylor and I will be at Trek Long Island. That's the last weekend of May / the first day of June. So a couple months away, but if anyone is going to be at that convention, please say hi to us. I think we're actually going to have like a table at the convention, so we're going to be really easy to find. And hopefully we're going to be moderating some of the panels there. So you should actually message the Trek Long Island people and let them know that you want to see Tex-Trek moderate panels. But there's going to be they already have several Star Trek actors lined up to guest at the con, and I think there will probably be some more announced as we get closer to that. So, and I've never been to New York before, so it'll be my first time in New York. I'm not going to spend a ton of time in Manhattan, but I will go from Long Island to Manhattan for at least a few hours just to see it.
That's very cool. Table there, panels. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then we're also planning to rent a car and drive upstate to Ticonderoga. So hopefully y'all will see some pictures of us on those beautiful set recreations they did of the original series sets. I've been wanting to do that for years, and even though it's like a pretty long drive, it's like a 5-hour drive from New York City, I think, at least, maybe longer. But that's the closest I've ever been to that part of the world, so I'm not gonna, I don't care about the Statue of Liberty. I'm sure like all the stuff in New York City is cool as hell, but I want to go visit the recreations of some 1960s sets to a TV show. That's what I want to see. So that's where we're gonna be in late May / early June.
I don't think you're gonna shock this audience too much.
No, yeah, y'all know what to expect from me. But with all that out of the way, I am excited to get into this episode. You know, like Dave, over all the years that we were doing Tex-Trek together, we really didn't talk about Next Generation a lot. So every now and then it would come up. Like we did kind of the similar format, but we focused on like the pilot episode. We focused on the finale episode. But there's so much TNG that we've just never have gotten around to talk about. So
it's true.
I'm glad that you could be here for this one.
Yeah, it was fun to jump in. I don't have any special connection to this episode, and indeed, possibly haven't seen it in decades. But I enjoyed the revisit, and I think we'll have some fun talking about it.
Well, I'm gonna quickly recap the episode by reading the synopsis I grabbed off of Memory Alpha, and then I'll kind of expand on that with spoilers to refresh it for everyone in case you haven't seen it in a while. But Heart of Glory, official synopsis is, Worf's loyalties to Starfleet are tested when 3 fugitive Klingons come on board the Enterprise D. And he basically sees these wild Klingons that say, we don't like all this peace with the Federation. We want to go back to the days of war and glory, and this time of peace sucks. And Worf ponders about that for a little bit, but ultimately he is there to be a Starfleet officer and helps bring these renegades down, and then does a cool dramatic scream at the camera as it cuts away dramatically.
Father, I would have loved it if they had just said, this new era sucks.
I mean, they pretty
just
much
like that.
do.
Yeah. Well, actually, when we give our basic thoughts, I have something to say about that.
This Roddenberry utopia is bullshit. But yeah, we should each just go around before we get into the episode breakdown and give our opening statements to let everyone know our broad thoughts on the episode. So, Taylor, I would like you to go first. But also, you chose Heart of Glory to be one of the first episodes we do a back-trekking retrospective on. So, if you could talk a little bit about that choice.
Okay. Well, this was one of the first Next Generation episodes I liked and really appreciated. I feel like season one was kind of rough, especially in the very beginning. And when we got to this episode, I was excited to have something a little different and a little bit more fun and Worf centric, which I thought was great. Yeah, this episode, it kind of, some of the beginning is extremely slow and boring. In my opinion, but once the Klingons enter the episode, I think it really like picks up. And I loved getting to see like a little bit of the Klingon lore and more depth to Worf's character, like getting his backstory. And I thought it was really well written and really well acted, especially from Michael Dorn as Worf. And I thought he had a lot of really good conversations with the Klingons. And I liked the kind of, will he betray his crew? Will he not? And I never doubted him. I was like, no, he is loyal. Like he's going to be fine. But I loved that kind of, there's like these little instances throughout the episodes where you're like, will he? You know, like the crew is kind of, you know,
Picard
nervous
doesn't
about
seem
it.
fully convinced. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting to kind of see that, you know, he did say he's the first Klingon in Starfleet. And so they're kind of like having this trust issue, you know, and they're just, you know, kind of, it's cool to see it unfold. So I think that really shines for me.
Cool. For me, the thing that I took away from focusing on this episode the last few days is that it really sets up a lot of the 24th Klingon. I'm sorry, a lot of the 24th century Klingon stuff. It establishes so much more than I used to think it did. I didn't realize just how much stuck out of this episode. I used to say that the season 2 episode, A Matter of Honor, when Riker has to go be the exchange student on a Klingon ship, that was kind of our first, you know, TNG exploration of these Berman era Klingons that are normally allies with the Federation. Brief little war in Deep Space Nine, but most of the time they're on our side. But we really explore a lot of stuff here, and there's a lot of lore that is set up here that sticks. Like a lot of the Worf arc throughout TNG and the Klingon arc throughout TNG that carries on to DS9 and beyond. You know, we get Worf's backstory finally cemented in this episode. We get, you know, those mentions of the Kittimer massacre, and, you know, later they build so much on that. When we learned that was caused by the Duras family colluding with Romulans, and we see that in this Roddenberry's even more utopia TNG, where we are friends with TOS's big bad guys, the Klingons. But, you know, sometimes it can be difficult being friends with them, and that some of them are gonna, you know, miss the good old days, and that's something that comes back up again in TNG in season 4, and then again in DS9. We get a spotlight on how unique of a Klingon Worf is. You know, you don't really see that because this is the first time we see him around other Klingons. It's the first time they're able to explore that. But he's such a unique Klingon, and they definitely. I always gave Deep Space Nine a lot of credit for highlighting that, but they started here in TNG. You know, him not being raised by Klingons, so he tries so hard to live up to Klingon rules and codes that most of the Klingons who also, you know, romanticize their culture and traditions, but a lot of Klingons fail to live up to it. And because he didn't know any better, he always, you know, lived by the rules. And the thing about Worf that when I was young always drew me to him, it's the same thing that also when I was little kid Fatheree, like it really drew me to Spock, and they were kind of my first two favorite Star Trek characters. But for some reason, I've always really been drawn to characters that are torn between two worlds. I think part of that probably comes from just being like the child of two divorced parents, but I always like that in my fictional characters, and I frequently you know, kind of relate to those types of characters, and even now, you know, it's something I think about a lot. I've talked about this on the show before, but kind of like the huge divide in modern times between like rural and urban America is something that I think a lot about. And yeah, I see Worf kind of have like these similar struggles. It reminds me a lot of my actual favorite fictional character of all time, but DC Comics is Superman, the original superhero. I love like the stories of Superman about him grappling with his background growing up on the farm in Kansas, but also his sci-fi origin as being this alien from Krypton. And it's very similar to Worf's experience. So
You know, I don't think, Fatheree, that many people have compared Superman to Worf. So I just want to congratulate you. I think it's a good. You're comparing something legit, though.
Yeah, it's something that really, Worf kind of carries throughout all of TNG and DS9 and onward, but they don't establish that until this episode. A lot of earlier TNG season 1 episodes, it kind of sounds like he didn't even grow up on Earth or around humans, and Justice, when Riker says "when in Rome," he's like, "When in where, sir?" Like he's never heard of Rome. And then he tells Data at one point, "I don't understand their humor either." Just like a lot, Worf didn't really have an origin story, to use another comic book term, until this episode. And it's also something like I think a lot about, like myself with like my own cultural roots and connections to Ireland and Irish culture, because that wasn't something that, like, in my immediate family, like my dad or granddad, no one ever like really kept up with that. But like Worf having to like read all this stuff on his own to explore Klingon culture, I have to like go out on my own to learn about my family's history in County Galway in Ireland. And even like when I talk to Irish people now, I don't know, maybe it's like imposter syndrome, but I'm like, I was talking to Sean Ferrick of Trek Culture the other day, and I said something kind of Irish to him. And I'm like did I say that right? Like I'm wondering, like, is he gonna like judge me for like not saying that right or something? So I think I see Worf kind of deal with that in this episode when he's put in a room with other Klingons. But Dave, what about you? What's your kind of broad thoughts on Heart of Glory?
Right on. Yeah. So I felt like as an exploration of Worf's Federation kind of progressivism versus the old school Klingon imperialism, it's a pretty solid episode that maybe I wish was a little bit more nuanced. It's I saw Aaron comments earlier saying it was a boring episode, and it's a little slow. It's a little slow at times. But what interested me that I feel like with your broader Klingon knowledge, you and Taylor, that maybe you can speak to this later. But I thought it was interesting that the Klingons here have a little bit less of the barbaric vibe that they sometimes do later, and they kind of felt more like almost like warrior poets to me. They were speaking very eloquently sometimes about that warrior ethos, more so than I'm used to with Klingons. And I thought that was an interesting thing. It just felt like it was like an earlier phase when they, Klingons weren't just quite pinned down yet. So I enjoyed seeing that aspect of it. And as an 80s kid, it also reminded me that, having grown up right at that time that this would have been being shown, that Russia at that time was going through all these reforms under Gorbachev. And he was there was like, if you were from the era, you'll know the words like perestroika or glasnost, and that they were sort of softening to the West and going through these reforms. And so it makes sense that Trek in the same era, holding up a mirror, that the Klingons who'd been coded as Russians in the 60s would become more sympathetic in the 80s, and that they would explore, and you get somebody like Worf who was, kind of cross-cultural between them. And then you would also, the next step, or the interesting story step, is what they did here, is to explore the idea of some hardliner Klingons who are not ready to give up that sort of adversarial imperialist role that they, that was their glory days. So I thought I was also enjoying it as that way that Trek holds up the mirror, because in the 80s, this was a mirror of something that was really happening right then and there, on the front pages in the news. And it was cool to remember that the time when Russians were becoming our friends, but we were still scared. And now
Yeah.
now we're scared again.
Now we're
Shit.
backpedaling away from that. But.
Yeah, well, you know how when the writers run out of ideas and they're like, let's just make them bad guys again.
Yeah, it's like Deep Space Nine season 4. It's like, oh, this is like the Klingons in the Federation start beefing again, you know?
Yeah. It turns out that's not just random, hack writing. It's sometimes how the world works.
That is very true.
But anyway, so yes, but I did enjoy the episode. I had a fun time with the revisit. And I also liked when, like Joel in the audience, when the Klingon builds the gun out of stuff. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and get into our episode breakdown. And we'll go through this thing kind of beat by beat. Starting off at the very beginning, I can understand criticisms of this episode being slow, but it does kind of open with some urgent action when they're like, the very first scene is like, oh, Starfleet is sending the Enterprise to the neutral zone to investigate a battle. And is it like, oh, it could be the Ferengi, like the big bad of this show. And they're like, oh no, it might actually be the Romulans. We're going to bring back the Romulans from the original series. They're going to be nasty bad guys in this new 24th century that we're just establishing in season 1 of TNG maybe. But, turns out it is neither. They kind of do like a bait and switch thing where it does kind of, if you're watching this for the first time and you hadn't seen like the trailers or anything, you might think like, oh, this is going to be TNG's first Romulan episode, but instead it turns out to be TNG's first Klingon episode. But the away mission with Geordi using the visual, what do they call it? The visual acuity transmitter to send the images back to the Enterprise. What did y'all think of that?
I can recall not this specific episode, but in those days, watching these things, and we talked about this off mic at one point, Fatheree, the idea that the visor was like a cool piece of technology, kind of in the same way that in the 60s, the original phasers or, communicators would be. And, I'm not going to say that the visor was as iconic as those, but it was a cool thing. And in an episode that's kind of a little procedural early on, this is kind of like, hey, we've got this new CSI thing going on, and check it out. We're gonna put it to use. I don't know that they would kind of later on be like, kind of drop Geordi's, the visor as a key plot point or as a recurring element, but it seemed kind of cool. Picard seemed a little maybe ableist in how he was like, hey, could you pose over there? Look to your left.
Yeah. He was like using Geordi as a webcam.
Yeah.
I thought that was actually pretty funny is that I felt like, Picard doesn't really go on away missions at all in TNG. Like he's always assigning Riker to pick the away team. And this felt like his little glimpse into the away team situation. And he's like living vicariously through Geordi's visor. And I think that was really funny. And of course, he's a little nerded out by like the technology. But I thought it was cool that Picard is the one who was like, hey, do you want to like test your little project in this situation? Because like Data and Geordi had been working on this, I guess, as like a little fun project. And I love that they have that so early in TNG because we know that they work together on so many projects like over time. And so I loved seeing Data and Geordi, like their little tech project together and Picard supporting them. I thought that part was cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that it was, I don't know how much they planned in advance the Data-Geordi friendship and how much evolved from the actors having a rapport and Geordi becoming chief engineer and stuff like that. But yeah, it seems like things were starting to gel with them.
I do kind of enjoy season 1 Geordi before he's engineer, and you get to see him do like a wider variety of things. Like there's several times in season 1 when he takes command of the Enterprise and he kind of shows some leadership potential. And here's kind of another example of him doing before he's just like the engineer guy. He's doing like away mission stuff like this, and it was a cool way for them to explain like, oh, the ship is about to explode because Geordi sees that the hull is about to rupture. So they, for this being like a slow episode, but it does kind of, it kind of tries to do like that TOS thing of having like everything is urgent. It's kind of high stakes and a bit melodramatic, but like oh no, like the ship's gonna blow up in 5 minutes. Like stop goofing around, Picard, admiring Geordi's vision.
The music in the opening scene before they even get over there, when it's just like we picked up this disturbance near the neutral zone. It's got that the season 1 still had some old school kind of Trek music, and I like that kind of big suspense music that they had. And I noticed several times the camera would push in on their faces and do more like that kind of dramatic close up that's I associate with TOS. It felt like, yes, they may have been going about it in a procedural way, but there was a little urgency to it, fueled by some old school Trek music and camera work.
Yeah, a lot of early TNG feels like TOS if they were making it in the 80s instead of the 60s. And this is kind of like a good example of that.
Yeah, I suppose to some degree it feels like it's two fighting, approaches. And maybe, broadly it was probably better that TNG found more of its own voice. But, I think I'll always lament that the music kind of got toned down.
Yeah, no, me and Taylor, when we were watching TNG, she always talked about how, like, oh, I love this, like, Ron Jones composer. And I was like, part of me was like, yeah, don't get too used to him because they're gonna axe him eventually. But
he did this episode, so.
Yeah, this is some of his best work, I think, because he does all the cool Klingon stuff. But speaking of the Klingons, they beam onto this derelict ship, and it occurred to me, I had never thought of this before, but this is basically the Kobayashi Maru, when Picard is like, I don't like this, it might be a trap. It's like, yeah, you're responding to a ship in distress in the neutral zone. Romulans might attack you. And I guess in Kobayashi Maru is Klingons, but now it's Romulans because 24th century. But we meet these, instead of Romulans, instead of the Talarians or anyone else, we find these 3 Klingons on board. Chorus, Conmel, and Knivus. Their leader, Chorus, the first time Von Armstrong plays anyone in Star Trek, so I don't think he knew what he was getting into with this role, but
he's got a good screen presence.
Yeah, and he's also really tall, so, when they have, like, tall-ass Michael Dorn as a Klingon, all the other Klingons you put around him, they also are going to have to be tall guys, so they don't look like little dweebs next to him, so...
Fatheree, I know that people listening to this in audio won't be able to appreciate this, but the still frame you've got of those Klingons looks like is it from Friday, that movie Friday? The what?
Very big reactions on their faces.
Yes.
Justified, their ship is blowing up.
So good, yeah. And by the way, speaking of music, always great to hear the, a reorchestration of the Jerry Goldsmith Klingon theme from the motion picture.
Another thing that stood out to me in this episode that never really stood out to me before, but how much respect and like low-key reverence Picard seems to have for his chief of security, Tasha Yar, because he's like, no, Tasha, I'm not sending you on the away team. Like, Romulans might attack us. I want you on the bridge. I can lose Riker and Data and where I don't need them. But no, Tasha, you stay here. And then when like they're beaming back to the Enterprise, he tells Tasha, I want you in the transporter room. So he's treating Tasha like she's like his big gun, like she's like the secret weapon of the Enterprise.
It's funny. I noticed those, and I thought that was interesting, but I also thought she had a very flatly written role overall for the episode.
Yeah, she ends up not doing much, and it's very Tasha Yar also to just kind of squander any potential there. This is 2 episodes, I think, before she's killed off, sadly. Or 3. I think 3 episodes after this, she dies.
You know what? When they were doing the visual acuity transmitter from Geordi's thing, something I just wanted to mention about that was that it was cool to kind of in the same. I'm going to do another comic reference here, Fatheree. I'm back. In the comics, Daredevil, who's also got a streaming show right now.
Topical, new show on Paramount Plus.
That's right. Well, maybe not Paramount Plus.
Or Disney Plus, one of the pluses.
Yeah. He is blind, but has a sort of radar sense that he got from some chemicals that gives him his powers or his kind of a ability to perceive things all around him. it's not unlike in the way they describe it how Geordi is able to, and they did a neat job of showing it in this. What looks like a lot of visual overlapping gibberish to Picard is like all this stuff that his brain has learned to filter. And I think they used actually a really cool and clever, very simple to understand metaphor for it, where Picard is like, "Oh, how can your brain process that?" And he's like, how when you're in a room with a bunch of people talking and you can zero in on one voice, he's like, it's like that. I thought that was a cool bit.
Yeah, and it is fun to see Picard kind of marvel at Jordan, like, oh, I'm starting to understand him. It's maybe not the best time to do that in the middle of a mission, but that does kind of say something about like this, utopian Roddenberry future of like, oh, even in like these dire stakes, the captain will still marvel, like, look, I can relate to this guy who serves under my command so much better now. It's just that's very Roddenberry.
Yeah, the idea that he's not jaded and stuff, and that he still sees these kind of little amazing moments is nice. That's a Trek trademark, is to always have a little bit of that scientific wonder going on. Except for maybe oh my God, why can I never remember his name? Who's the dipshit from Chicago again?
Captain Shaw.
Shaw does not seem to have a lot of wonder.
Uh-huh.
But maybe he did back in before his tragedy.
Before Wolf 359.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
So that's actually kind of Picard's fault.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts before the ship blows up and they beam back to the Enterprise?
Yeah, I really love whenever Riker and Data enter the room and I can't remember if Picard is like, are they Romulans or something? And they're like Klingons. And Worf has this amazing head whip.
Oh yeah.
He hears the word Klingons and he's like, I've been summoned. And I think that is really funny. And I think that's like the turning point for me when I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a Worf-centric episode, and I was like stoked.
Yeah.
I thought it was so dramatic. Yeah,
it is.
It was so
it's
dramatic.
It's like that TOS style of melodrama.
Yeah, I loved it.
But I love that too. I could see people seeing like, oh, that's kind of corny or cheesy, but I don't know. I dig it.
I love cheese.
I do too.
Well, let's talk about the Klingons on the Enterprise. They get Knivas to sickbay. He's not doing too well. But Chorus and Conmel talk to Picard, and they explain, what's going on. Why are you Klingons on a Talarian ship in the middle of the neutral zone? And they say that, oh, we were just being transported by that ship, and some Ferengi attacked us, because we assume you don't like Ferengi. Being a Starfleet captain is probably why they went with Ferengi. But Worf is like, they weren't using Ferengi weapons. They're like, oh, no, these are like Ferengi with Klingon weapons. And we had to take over the Talarian ship, and we were able to blow up the Ferengi. But we, I guess, drifted into the neutral zone. I like that Picard doesn't buy it at first. He's like, yeah, I don't know. That all sounds sus.
He doesn't exactly, confine them to quarters, though. He still gives them free reign on the ship.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, later on, starts to get a little nervous that Worf might not. His loyalties might be tested, though.
Yeah, this is also when we see the first ever depiction of the Klingon death ritual, as Data points out later in the episode. But the death of Knivas, they do that. All the three Klingons scream. I remember watching this as a kid, seeing it for the first time, thinking like, oh, that's like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So
it's really like, it's big, right? It's like sometimes Next Generation seems a little sedate, and here's these guys howling for their dead comrade, and it's so infectious. What I thought was interesting is you could almost interpret it multiple ways. When Worf he's not initially joining in, and maybe because he recognizes that he's not part of this particular group. Or maybe his blood isn't stirred yet, and then it does become stirred. Or maybe he felt embarrassed that he hadn't started, done it right away. There's multiple possibilities there. But, it's funny. I knew that scene more from the meme and that people posting that image of the Klingons howling than I did for remembering this episode until I rewatched it. So it was nice to revisit it, and I was like, that is really cool, and it comes to a very interesting full circle at the end. and another scene that I think can be interpreted maybe one or two different ways.
I also kind of interpreted it as like instinctual, where it was kind of like residual pain, like residual grief. I think you kind of mentioned that, but it felt very instinctual to me, where it was like not really a choice, like he was thinking about it, but it was like, oh, well, this is happening and my comrades, but not my comrades, like they're grieving and then I should too. But it was like almost like proximity like made it happen is what it felt like to me.
Well, the way, I was talking about how these kind of Klingons seem to have a more poetic sort of bent. There's a line, oh my gosh, I wrote it down, and I'm not going to be able to find it right now, that where Worf is telling them that he, maybe it's, shit. Okay. He says to Captain Kinnear later on.
They use Captain and Commander both for chorus.
Okay.
So it's confusing.
He says when he's defending them later, he says, "What burns in their eyes fires my soul," and that kind of goes to what you were saying. I think Taylor is that he did feel it, and then he does feel the Klingon, deep in his bones. He feels that sort of calling. It's definitely it didn't feel like it was faked.
Yeah.
But I do kind of like the idea of like in a sports event, if everybody's like standing for the national anthem and you don't, or you don't put your heart over your hand over your heart or whatever. That he was
There's
just like
peer pressure.
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah.
He's like, I know about this. I'm a Klingon raised by humans. I know about this. Don't embarrass me in front of my Klingon people.
That's that'd be like the Lower Decks spin on it, or maybe Boimler would do that. But yeah, no, it's a really good scene here.
I really like how Rob Bowman directed this too. He said that when he saw the script, he was pretty excited. Season 1 of TNG was a rough production. But I think when he saw this, he was like, "Oh, I can have some fun shooting this." And so, we get like the cool like overhead dramatic camera angle, and there's some fun cinematography later in the episode. Sorry, my computer just blinked for a second.
Okay, fair enough.
But you also notice here, like if you rewatch the episode, it might not stand out the first time, but you see Chorus and Conmel remove the little like metal toe from the Knievis's Klingon boot. Oh. So later, that's one of the components they use to build their little backup disruptor.
That's right. I didn't quite catch that.
And I was talking about in my opening statements how this is the first time you get Worf's backstory. I guess like they start confessing to him like what is actually going on, but he also confesses to them what's been going on with him, and the audience learns about Worf's adoption by human parents and how he and his foster brother attended the academy, and his brother was like, "This ain't for me," but Worf was like, "Oh, I like this Starfleet stuff." But that's how we got our first Starfleet Klingon. But I guess that comes up first when Worf tells them about the Khitomer outpost, and I was found by a human Starfleet officer.
Had prior to this, had Worf opened up very much at all in any previous episodes?
Not really. Like we saw, I guess one of his fantasies was a Klingon woman to do violent sex with when Riker became a Q for a little bit and was like granting wishes to every, and he gave like Geordi vision and made Wesley Crusher a grown up, and then he's like, "Oh, and Worf, here's a Klingon sex kitten for you to fight." And we also saw like his pet Targ from childhood reappear.
Not exactly a I'm going to be vulnerable. And he actually is pretty vulnerable to these Klingons, even though they're kind of, again, that's that side of Klingons that's a little bit more, I feel like, warrior poet style, like that sort of medieval concept of it. Because these guys are eloquent. There was something I wrote down too from Chorus where he's talking about Worf. He says, so when the night was still and quiet and the sound of the blood rushing through your veins filled your ears, the only way to silence it was to slip out into the night and, like the hunter that spawned you, join in the struggle of life and death. Like,
Yeah.
it's a nice turn of phrase.
And
Made me want to Klingon up.
in my notes for that, I put that Chorus is very like he's romanticized, like this Klingon instinct, like this warrior,
Right.
like you're saying, like poet. And like I think that is what is really neat about these Klingons, like you're saying, is it's like it's so believable and something you want to be a part of, you know? And so I think it's cool they're kind of trying to recruit Worf. But like if you are paying attention, like Worf, I think has his guard up like a lot. Even though he seems to be letting it down, he is really not answering a lot of their questions. And he's doing a really good job at like listening and like kind of staying quiet and letting them give him more information. Like he doesn't have to probe for like any of the actual truth. Like they just end up spilling it to him because he's quiet and he's reserved and he's just letting them like tell on themselves. And I think that is such an interesting character trait, you know, for him to be, you know, very tied to these people, like just curious and getting all of this information, but he is also like sitting down and just listening to it. Like it's like he is not, I don't know exactly how to phrase it. Like he's not throwing himself into it and like going blindly to follow these people. Like he's curious and he appreciates what they're teaching him and stuff, but also he knows he has a job and he's like gonna prioritize that. But I think that his reservations and him listening is really interesting. Like if you watch the episode, like he's not really asking them for anything. Like they're really just giving him all of this info and he's just being patient.
It's almost like he's kind of scared to hear too much. Like he's scared, like he'll be like tempted to like run off with them, you know, like because it does seem like it does, you know, ring true. Like the quote of Dave that Dave just brought up about you know, when you would hear those cries and make you want to like run out into the night. It's very similar to what Worf would tell Ezri Dax in Deep Space Nine about how, like, he said, like, oh yeah, when my foster father took me and my foster brother out camping and we would hear the wolves and my brother would get so scared, but I was intrigued, I was aroused, I wanted to like run out there and be a wild thing with them, you know. It was so that very much is kind of something that Chorus is recognizing in Worf. Like you know, you're obviously still Klingon. Like you don't let us just, you know, insult you like a typical Starfleet human. Like you get mad at us when we try to poke at you. It's very similar to how his brother Kern would test him when Kern comes aboard the Enterprise before he reveals, I'm actually your brother. He was kind of you know, trying to piss him off by kind of insulting him and trying to insinuate he's not like a true Klingon or something. And then Worf is like, you want to bet? And then, you know, here it's kind of the same thing. So
yeah, it's interesting that there's, you know, I wonder if, you know, that DS9 anecdote about his childhood was based on a, you know, revisiting this episode and looking for stuff to key off of, or if it just, you know, worked out that they kind of created a through line for that, just by kind of, you know, even with a bunch of different writers, there's commonalities and they pick up on things.
yeah, I mean, luckily, I think it was just a lot of the DS9 staff also worked on TNG, so they knew the Worf history. Same thing with O'Brien. Like they're pretty good with like keeping like O'Brien's continuity intact in DS9 as well.
You know, what's interesting is these Klingons, they have done some bad things. They did, you know, kill I don't know what size ship, but they killed the Klingon ship that came to bring them in. And I'm like, are they kind of like, I guess like a militia, you know, kind of off on their own. They want to go do their own thing and, you know, stick to their super conservative Klingon ways. And what did they say? They said that it was, you know, like peace was like a living death to them, and that the Klingon Empire had become corrupted by the illusion of peace. So yeah, I think what Taylor was talking about Worf's kind of more reserved approach to the conversation. That has to be kind of basically part his Starfleet training and part his upbringing, raised by humans, where a part of him, even though he's like, man, I hear the call that they hear, but this can't abide. And then he just lets them, reveal themselves.
You know what these guys make me think of is it's kind of the same way that, here in the United States, a lot of people, there's this kind of romanticized idea of like the old frontiersmen. And like,
For sure.
I think there's like a desire of people who, they're like, oh, like I'm tired of this modern society. I want to be like my ancestors, just be like this independent man of the land. And when in reality, a lot of that like culture like kind of never existed. Like when people settled the West, they were doing that off of like government grants and stuff, and like
right,
the army would come in to like clear out the natives, and then people were like paid to go like, oh, go be a farmer, out in Kansas, so.
Right, it's an appealing bit of myth making to imagine that the lone frontiersman taming the West and all that, and one man can do it all himself. But yeah, it's not the reality, and these Klingons haven't faced up to the reality. Even the captain or commander who comes looking for them is he kind of sees through that myth. I think he's a guy who seems like he's kind of got some nuance to his portrayal. All the Klingons do in this one, actually.
But it kind of speaks to kind of like that danger of plugging yourself into like these like romanticized beliefs and not really like balancing it out with like a rational observation of just like reality. Like there's no future for these guys. Like what were they gonna do? Like take this freighter into Romulan space and then like just start fighting Romulans? Like they were gonna get blown up in like a week. If the Enterprise hadn't intervened.
At a certain point, you become like the what was it? The Japanese guy after World War II who stayed on the island and was still ready to fight the war for like 20 years or something.
Yeah, there were a few of them. There's like a few Japanese soldiers in the Pacific that they never gave up the war for decades.
Yeah, and it's wild. But I'm sure the writers were thinking of historical things like that. Worf, I jotted this down, said, "Perhaps your dreams of glory no longer fit the time." Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, he's definitely indicating that to them. I think if they weren't so intent on finding someone who shared their vision and excited to kind of meet this dude, especially, he's a guy in a position of power that can help them too, that they probably wouldn't have blabbed so quick.
Right. Yeah, they think they lucked out. They're like, holy moly, like this guy can replace the guy we just lost. He can maybe like get us a new ship. And he also seems to be like a cool Klingon. So, he's not some like softy like the rest of these Starfleet people are. So
there's even like a shot of that when they're in sickbay over the dying Klingon and Worf walks in and the Conmel and Chorus just look at each other and they like make eye contact and then look back at Worf. Like there's definitely like a silent conversation there. It's like, oh my gosh, like there's a Klingon here and he's in Starfleet. Like we got this. Like we can bullshit our way out of this,
Yeah, I like all their little knowing looks and stuff.
Yeah.
And I agree with Dave about like the Klingon dialogue is really cool. Like one of the lines that I jotted down when they do reveal their renegade status to Worf, but Chorus talks about instincts not dulled by civilized men, and I was like, yeah, that's I could see like the appeal of that to Worf. And eventually we learn about Worf accidentally killing another boy in a soccer match with a headbutt. And ever since then, he's been like a hyper reserved Klingon. And he probably sees these guys, we can kind of retcon this in there that Worf is like, oh, all my life I've had to like hold back and be reserved. And with these guys, I could go wild. So I that would be such a relief.
But also I think he's thinking they haven't learned this reservation. Like there's parts of him that he like, even, I don't want to spoil towards the end, but like there's things that he can teach Klingons that Klingons can't teach him, right? And so like he's thinking, oh well, in this ally like in this Federation, the Klingons are part of the ally ship or whatever, so it's needed to have some of that reservation and to get along. And he's probably thinking, yeah, like that kid that I accidentally killed, playing a game with, like there's a reason you have to be like pulled back sometimes, like for the safety of others. And he's thinking like, wow, these people could be very dangerous if they're not considering how their actions like are going to affect others, right?
So Taylor, let me ask you, because I think it's kind of weird that after they confessed that like they did destroy that other Klingon ship, the Takog, like Worf just kind of continues to like give them this tour. But you think part of it might be because he's trying to get more information from them?
That's how I was reading it. I was reading it like he was like, well, I'm getting all this information. Maybe I'll just keep walking them around. But again, like it's very weird to me that he is like showing them around. And as soon as he realized that they had like destroyed the Klingon ship and like they're on the run, to be fair though, at this point he doesn't know that I can't remember the captain in the other ship that's coming to get them.
Kanera.
Kanera.
Commander Kanera.
Yeah, so he doesn't know at this point that Commander Kanera has made contact with Picard and that they're fugitives that they want yet. He doesn't know that. So I think all he knows at this point is like, oh, they're like breaking off from the Klingons, and they aren't a big fan of the Alliance and they blew up the ship. And maybe he's like still calculating like what's the next best step. And he's like, I think at this point, he's like, I just need to keep their trust until I can figure out the next step. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And he's like, maybe they'll tell me more.
There's another possibility that's a little less maybe guileful, which is that, Worf is like, well, I can stop them if it comes to it. Let's see if they can see a little bit of Federation life and I can win them over to, our world.
Oh, see, I love that too, because
too.
he's like talking about, well, this could be like the piece that you don't want. Like, look at this ship and all of this integration.
Right. And he's probably thinking it's pretty nice, right? And they're thinking, look how soft they are.
Yeah, I love that interpretation, Dave.
But they're also trying to get to the battle bridge so that they can saucer separate and then take off in the star drive section. I love the line from Worf when he says, "When relieved of its bulk, the Enterprise becomes an exceptional weapon." So Worf is a fan of when the Enterprise, when the fat one, the Galaxy class Enterprise D, when it splits up and you have the star drive section by itself without the
It looks
saucer.
terrible, Fatheree. It looks terrible.
Worf loves it. Worf is into it.
All right. Well, Worf's been right about anything, especially raising kids.
Right.
But yeah, no, I took note of that line too, and I just, that sounded like him bragging a little bit. He's like, I am on this ship that, maybe doesn't look it, but when it wants to, it can kick some big ass.
Yeah, when they're like, "What battles do you fight?" And he's like, "I've been in battle."
By the way, Father, I wanted to rewind for just 1 second to the Klingon howl. I found one of my notes, and I just wanted to mention this is like a super cool bit of writing when Data reveals what the howl is about. It reminds me of the bit about Klingons killing their gods and stuff back in the in DS9. Data explains that the Klingon death ritual is a howl that's a warning to the dead that a Klingon warrior is coming.
Yeah, beware, a Klingon warrior is about to arrive.
Yeah, that's so cool. When these older this season one has some mixed writing for sure, but there's all these little gems, right? There's these neat moments. Go ahead, Taylor. Sorry.
And I like that kind of circles back with Geordi, where Picard is kind of like, oh, I understand him now, when he's like seeing through the visor. And then in this episode, when he's getting these explanations from Data and also like seeing the howling and stuff, he makes a comment in there about understanding Worf more too. So there's kind of like a parallel that they're trying to draw, which is why I think they put like that visor stuff in the beginning is like a parallel of like Picard learning his crew and like understanding something different than like what would be like quote unquote normal.
Yeah, or just trying to see something from someone else's perspective.
Right.
He should have done it like the guy in the final season of Discovery, where each crew member gets like 2 minutes or something.
Oh yeah, like Raynor is like, you have 20 words to explain yourself to me.
Yeah. But no, he's actually doing it the organic way, the good way.
Yeah, he's letting everything unfold, just like Worf.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, eventually the Klingon cruiser does show up to arrest these guys, and Worf explains they'll be tried and executed. But we get the standoff with the security team, and Tasha Yar, like you were saying, Dave, like doesn't have a ton to do in this episode. But yeah, she's not involved in like the action. You know, it's like here, like she's ready to kick ass if she has to, but these Klingons surrender pretty easily. But we get the kind of the bait and switch hostage thing with the little girl.
I think it's a good scene.
Yeah, I like it. It shows that why Worf might respect these guys, of like they just have like their own code, their own morality. By the end of the episode, you can see like, well, do they really like live up to their own standards,
Right.
of like not taking hostages or whatever? But
there's at least maybe it's a show of it, or maybe it's a very sincere, but it seems like he was maybe about to do it, and then he kind of considered. He's like, oh. I gotta show this Starfleet Klingon.
Yeah,
that
like
we
this,
can, that we have honor, that we're serious about it.
Yeah, he's like, this guy Worf is actually even more fundamentalist than me. I have to be like by the book here to like get him on my side.
Yeah. I actually didn't super enjoy this scene. I thought it was kind of clunky and awkward. Mostly I just didn't. It felt like Tasha was going into this like super hot already. Like she was already like on level 10. And it was really just like, go get the Klingons and like, let's like have them, withheld. And it's just like super awkward. And then like this kid like comes out of nowhere and like runs directly to the Klingon, isn't throwing a fit or anything. He like picks
like
her up.
Stagey.
Yeah, it was a little bit too like smooth. Like it didn't feel like the kid was in distress. The mom didn't really seem that much in distress. And then literally she was like, put the kid down. And he like handed the kid to Worf, which I thought was weird. Like, why not put the kid on the floor or to her mom? Like it was like, here, Worf, here's like a token of my peace. Here's what I think peace is. Here, have this kid. Like it's just so weird to me. And then
it sort of makes sense that he would care more about what Worf thought of his action than what the mom thought.
Yeah, that's a good
yeah.
But you're right, it is stagey, and I thought some of the stuff with the kid was a little hokey. But what I liked about it, though, was that the Klingon, in a way that is left somewhat open to interpretation, he did the right thing, arguably. He didn't take a kid hostage, and you're like, is it honorable or is it just pragmatic? I don't know.
Or is it acting?
I like when there's that kind of nuance and they don't tell you everything.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely open for a lot of interpretation here.
I don't mind the little kid being so unfazed, being picked up by this big, scary Klingon guy, because I kind of like that in, like, this, very Gene Roddenberry utopia 24th century. Like, not only do you have little kids running around your starship, but they're so unafraid of things because everything is, like, so peaceful and hunky-dory. Like, it doesn't even occur to the kid to be scared. But I think it is kind of awkward when Tasha is like yard a bridge, security when she's like hostage situation.
Right.
Oh wait, never mind. Just kidding.
Yeah.
She
it's
didn't
like
even
diffused.
try and cool it down.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, kids will run up to like Darth Vader at those Disney parks, though. Sometimes kids like those villains, like scary looking people.
Yeah. That does kind of call back to Tasha's past, though. She had a really terrible childhood. And so maybe like that is kind of a trigger for her, right? And she's just like imagining the worst case scenario and always on that level, especially when kids are involved. But I do think that was like that like hostage call. And then like literally 2 seconds later, like the cancellation call was awkward. I thought it was just a little clunky. And it did feel very like, out of touch. Like she didn't totally understand the situation. Like she was just kind of like going into it blind. I don't know. It just felt a little weird. Like I don't really know how to put my finger directly on what was so cringy about it for me. But
it is awkward.
I was looking at Memory Alpha for some notes after I watched it, and I think that the script was written in 2 days. Like it was kind of done in some haste, and I wonder if that's a scene that maybe could have been massaged a little bit more, but there was no time for it.
Maybe, yeah. Like even if they just added a little bit more dialogue or action to the scene, like like just a little bit something more, I think would have made it a little more believable.
After the Klingons are sent to the brig, Worf pleads for their, not for their life, but I guess for them to have a more humane execution. He says, "Oh, can we like just drop them off on a planet in the Halley system where they can meet death on their feet with a weapon in hand?" But that's a no go. But I think that is such a cool idea because we have no idea what the hell the Halley system is. It might have been explored in like some books or something, but that system has never come up again in canonical Star Trek. And I'm like, what the hell is going on in the Halley system? That like Worf just mentions that like everyone knows. Oh, that's where you go to get killed by something. That's like a deadly system to be in. Any planet there, apparently. Worf says, yeah, just pick one. Just drop them off on some planet in the Halley system.
Yeah, it's this is like the fire swamp in Princess Bride, whatever that. It's a bad place to go to. Lots of dangers. Honestly, it'd be kind of cool if they brought that up again. It seems like you always try and lose people in asteroid belts or in a in the atmosphere of a gas giant or whatever. Go to the Halley system next time. Contrive a reason why they have to, and let's see what badass shit goes down.
Or even
there.
if we see like Ensign Jack Crusher on the Enterprise G with Captain 7 of 9 someday, and he could be like, oh, here's a trick that me and my mom learned when we were doing some humanitarian mission in the Halley system, or just name drop it or something. It'd be a cool thing to reference.
I agree.
But I like Worf like this is Worf is like a very junior officer. He's just kind of the almost like a glorified extra on the bridge sometimes in TNG season 1, and here he is, standing in front of the captain talking to the captain on the other ship, and kind of in a more what's the word I'm looking for? Not ceremonial, but a more like a
ambassadorial negotiation.
Just a heightened role, just like a heightened role.
It's his first. It's one of his first probably shots at statecraft, I guess. Something that'll become important to him later on.
I guess you have any thoughts before we get into the climactic Klingon escape and warp core standoff?
Did y'all like Canera, the Commander Canera?
I like him, but I don't like the set that he's on, because this is towards like the end of the season and they don't have like any budget left, and for some reason they can't use the Bird of Prey set from Star Trek 4. So he just has like a black screen behind him that
He's got a screensaver on.
As a kid, it bothered me a lot in this episode that he has this Federation banner next to a Klingon banner behind him, because we never see that again. We never see that on any Klingon ship, and they had even this episode they're figuring out Worf's backstory, but they still hadn't exactly figured out the relationship with the Klingons, and like, is the Empire part of the Federation? Is it just kind of an ally of the Federation? Like, they hadn't really spelled out those details yet. And here I think they were kind of trying to keep their options open, but I kind of like it now. It's like, oh, what's like this weird like joint Klingon Federation patrol ship that went near the Romulan neutral zone to go after these guys or something. I don't know. It's just like, I kind of like the oddness and uniqueness of it now, but yeah, at the time, or not I didn't watch this in 88, but when I did watch it in the 90s for the first time, it did kind of bother me. But
the symbols are purple like their blood.
I liked his dialogue though, and like what you were saying, how he was also like, yeah, Worf, I get it. I get like, Klingons want to live in like that time of war, but those days are over.
And we haven't mentioned it, but I guess, was this the first appearance of like other Klingons other than Worf?
Yeah, in the first time we see them in TNG,
and the visuals were pretty much from the movies, right? From the motion picture and like Trek 3 and stuff. Yeah, their uniforms, which it's a great look. I love that look. So they all look cool. They've all got the flowing manes of hair and cool mustaches and beards and everything. I liked him. There's not a lot to that captain, but I liked his presence.
The Berman era tradition of borrowing a lot from the movies, but I mean, like it works. So they get a lot of bang for their buck with that stuff. Thank you so much in the live audience to Matthew Averett for the $5 super chat. Matthew says, welcome back, Dave. You've been missed. Have a great weekend, Tex-Trek family. So thank you so much, Matt. I hope you have a great weekend, too.
Yeah, much appreciated. I am happy to be back in the seat.
Taylor, did you have anything else to say before we get into the escape and standoff?
I'm ready for the escape and standoff.
So they build their little backup weapon out of little doodads that were like hidden in their Klingon armor and their Klingon uniforms. So this is where like the Ron Jones music I think is really cool. But yeah, I don't know. I like the action here. I like them fighting the Starfleet security people. We get a firefight in the corridor, and it takes I think 3 phaser hits to bring down Conmel, but he does
Pretty
go
cool.
down. So he doesn't get a death ritual though. There's no howl for him. I guess in the heat of battle, it's okay to not do it.
They can't pause for that. That's when you get some downtime. You know, Fatheree, the putting the gun together reminded me of the Londo doing that in the first episode, I think, of Babylon 5's ongoing.
Oh, right.
show.
Yeah, that is a thing in there of the well, this would have been out first, so
Yes, it would have.
Don't you dare say to Joe Michael Straczynski that he borrowed something from Star Trek instead of the other way around, because I know firsthand he will block you on Twitter if you even insinuate that happened. But
all right. Don't hold a grudge, Fatheree. He might have just done it in a little moment of
No,
this guy's a jerk.
That's my favorite non-Star Trek TV show, probably.
But yeah, I do wonder if he like saw this and like filed it away in the back of his head. I don't think he copied it necessarily, but Alan Moore. I don't think he meant to copy that Outer Limits
the Twilight
episode,
Zone episode with the
Outer
Watchmen.
Limits,
Outer Limits.
But he sure did.
Oh.
But yeah, that's a pretty cool fight, and seeing a Klingon take several hits to get knocked down is cool. And I'll get launched around by those phasers. It's a nice bit of action there.
This is where I like the Kynera stuff, though. When Kynera on the other ship is talking to Picard, and Picard is like, "Okay, we were about to transport these prisoners to you, but there's a little incident. They're running loose." And Kynera is like, "Well, Picard, do you need our help?" And Picard tells him, "No." He's like, "I think we got this on our own. We will handle it." But what do y'all think about Picard turning down the offer for help and saying that they're gonna take care of these guys themselves?
I thought that was his offer seemed to be very sincere. Not like, "So Picard, you have a trained Klingon warrior on your ship. Do you need some help?" He was like. He seemed like he's like, "This could be a problem. We'll help you out, and it's no dishonor on you." Like, he seemed pretty sincere.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I think it was the right move diplomatically for Picard to turn it down, because that's kind of like, you can't, part of being allies with the Klingons is like you can't, show weakness to them. Like you have to show that you're like a worthy ally of them. And so I think that was kind of important for Picard to be like, "No, we are the flagship of the Federation. We can handle, 2 dudes running around our ship."
Can they though?
Very nearly didn't. Like, the whole ship was at threat, but by the time all was said and done, and it was kind of funny to me. Picard was like, "There's been a slight problem."
Yeah, but also it's kind of awkward because, like, spoilers, but they both die. So like, do they really like capture them? No. Like, Picard should have been like, "Well, it depends. Do you want them alive or dead? Because we're gonna give them to you dead." Like,
I never thought of that. Yeah, from the Klingon perspective, they're like, "What the hell, Picard? Like, you killed our prisoners."
Yeah.
As we know, they're at that point they stopped caring though. They're just empty shells.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, they were gonna get killed anyway, so like there was no hope for these. Their plan was not sustainable.
Arguably, what they got was the best case scenario they were going to get. They weren't going to get sent off to the whatever system, so they got to at least die in combat.
Yeah, I was kind of like suicide by going renegade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that one dude at the end, what is his name? The main Klingon.
Chorus?
Yeah, he falls in slow motion through like 3 panes of glass or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, before that happens, he gets a pretty cool little standoff where he may not hold kids hostage, but he will hold a what was it?
Dilithium crystal chamber.
The intermex
Yeah.
chamber. But yeah, basically if he shoots that on the warp core, the entire ship will blow up. And so when he says like I'll only speak to my countryman, and then they have to send Worf to negotiate. But yeah, he wanted to run off on the battle bridge with Worf. He says like, "Oh, we could set the galaxy on fire or something like that." And but it's like no, like how long are you gonna last? You know, it's not sustainable. But it does show how so many Klingon blowhards are at the end of the day like they're kind of full of shit. Like they don't live up to their same values. Worf is kind of like the only one who does because he read all that stuff in a book instead of like growing up in the society. So he was just kind of like, oh, I'm just going to like actually live by this and not be a hypocrite.
Right.
But I like the conversation they get when Worf talks about like no, you just want to be wild and not have, you know, like duty or discipline, and like the greatest battle is, you know, the battle a warrior fights inside. And it watching it now after seeing Star Trek Picard season 3, it's very similar to the stuff he kind of tells Raffi when he's like old wise Worf. It's like, oh, that stuff that was part of him from the very beginning here in season 1 of TNG, that kind of rises to the surface when he's the very zen Worf we get in Picard season 3.
Yeah, it's nice when that works out. Like you can see it gestating. He was thinking about those things, and then he became like a teacher of them. I guess this was arguably a somewhat failed lesson in that he wanted to get through to the guy, but instead he had to shoot him through 3 panes of glass.
It's a hell of a climax, though. Like I love the exchange of dialogue when Chorus is so pissed at Worf for rejecting him, and he says like, "You're not a real Klingon." It's kind of like telling like someone like, "You're not a real man." It's like meant to like cut deep, and Worf just says perhaps not, and shoots him. And as cold as that is, though, then he still respects him enough and respects their shared cultural bonds enough that he does this is the coolest Klingon death howl out of, which actually hasn't happened that much in Star Trek. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the Gorn eggs at the end of the show, when I like to talk about the Easter eggs, in jokes, and continuity connections here in a few minutes. But yeah, the Klingon death howl doesn't really come up that often, but I think this is my favorite one, when you have like that really cool camera cut to like a bunch of different shots as it like doesn't pull out, but just cuts to like wider and wider shots. It was a cool effect.
Yeah, I thought that it's one of those little ambiguous moments that I kind of like, where Chorus, Worf pries his eyes open so that he can like see it, and in some ways he's like, you can see it as well. He's telling him, "You're gonna get. I will give you the honor of the Klingon howl." But there's there's an element where Chorus looks terrified, almost like, I didn't realize how Klingon you were, and that you were actually maybe more Klingon than I am. And he looks like he died, almost like terrified of Worf's like Klingon power, how potent he is. It is a dope scene, though.
It's kind of funny because you saying that, it kind of goes with the notes I wrote. Chorus over explains Klingon stubbornness to Worf. Like Worf doesn't understand Klingon stubbornness himself, and like Chorus is like calling him a brother, and when he betrays him, Chorus says, "I can't believe it," and Worf is like, "Believe it." Like, I think that is so badass. Like, it's such a cool scene where I feel like Chorus is just like, this whole time, right? He's been doing all the talking, and Worf hasn't. He's just been listening, and so he is caught off guard because this whole time Chorus hasn't been asking clarifying questions. He hasn't been like diving deep to understand Worf at all, right? Like, he's getting surface level information and his own assumptions. And so at the very end here, you have that, it's like a tragedy to him, but I feel like to the audience and like to Worf, like we kind of see this coming, like Worf isn't going to turn. And I think I love the line where he's just like, "Believe it." And it's just such a great, I don't know,
it's a little bit of an 80s badass line too, like in the 80s action movie style, but as tailored for Worf in his kind of man of few words way. but yeah, I think that's a really good point. That this guy, you know, they immediately gravitated to Worf, thinking, "Oh yeah, this guy's got to be like us. If he's got any Klingon at all, he's got to be like us." And they really didn't push past the surface, and so Worf had to show him.
Jill in the live audience is pointing out, believe it as like his other cool kind of corny, maybe very, very kind of popcorn action movie line he has in Star Trek First Contact when he says, "Assimilate this," before blowing up the Borg in that movie.
That was good. He has some fun one-liners.
I ate this stuff up as a kid. You know, I loved Spock, and then at some point, I credit DS9 for it more than TNG, but at some point, like, Worf replaced Spock as my favorite Star Trek characters. And part of it was because, like, oh yeah, just kind of the action hero side of it definitely appealed to me. But you also get, you know, more traditional Star Trek thoughtful stuff with him as well, so...
And a little bit of a wrap up with a bit of a wry Star Trek humor. You know, what would have back in Kirk's day had that music that went like doo-doo-doo-doo.
Oh, yeah, they all laugh way too hard and way too long at a joke that was only kind of funny. But yeah.
Yeah.
Which is how Spock's brain ended last week when Dr. McCoy was like, "I knew it. I never should have connected his mouth." And they're all like, "Ah!" Yeah.
I'm going to start doing that more, though, in life. I'm going to just be like, this is where the episode ends, and then I'll just walk out of the room.
But yeah, let's talk about our ending. Kynera offers Worf, like, "Oh, you're so cool. You should come join up with us when you're done with your tour of duty on the Enterprise." And Worf says, "I'm honored." And then he's like, "Oh, don't worry, Captain Picard. I wouldn't leave you. I was just being polite."
Yeah, it's a good moment, and then he like has to like kind of emphasize it.
It's funny.
They say it
like,
twice.
Yeah.
Michael Dorn is so deadpan, especially like in season 1 with the stuff, and he's just him, the scary Klingon guy with a super serious voice saying like, "I was just being polite." I don't know. But yeah, it does kind of end on a humorous note. Very TOS. This is
Honestly,
TNG is very TOS when you stop and look at it.
I like, for the most part, those kind of endings. If they're not like, some sort of mean-spirited thing necessarily,
right?
And it's kind of fun. It gives you the vibe, right, that at the end of the day they're kind of like a family. It can be weird when they've had something pretty serious go down, and arguably this should have been more serious to Worf.
Agree.
It didn't fit the tone of the episode, but
people
it's a fun enough. It's a fun enough scene.
People died on the Enterprise this day. So.
Yeah, literally the last scene was him howling at Corus's death, and then it cuts to this.
Boing. Yeah. Worf has had to question his values and put his own countrymen in the grave and all this, and then he closed with a quip. But that was the tradition of the era, and taken on its own merits, kind of a fun scene.
Also, I think at least 2 of his Enterprise co-workers died. Like they were killing security officers on their way out of the brig.
That's Tasha's worry.
But yeah, I also really like when he's like, "Oh, I have no desire to leave the Enterprise." And now this is the first time I've watched it since we watched it the first time. And so I'm like, "Oh, but you're going to go to DS9 and you're going to have such a great time over there."
Well, the ship is going to crash on a planet, so he doesn't have a choice.
The Worf of the moment here, though, is ready to stick on board. Worf of 8 years or whatever it is later, maybe not.
Yeah, he has to deal with 7 years of Picard's character development, and then he'll be out.
Well, it's been fun.
Yeah, he's like, "All right, this guy kind of sucks now. It's time to go. He's a bad role. We're done."
Any other thoughts on Heart of Glory before we get into the Gornegg section of the show?
No, I think I said my piece.
Ditto.
Okay. With that out of the way, we will move on to the Gorn Egg section, where I like to talk about the Easter eggs, in-jokes, and continuity connections in the episode that I think are worth mentioning. But starting off, this is some fun stuff. The Talarian freighter that the Klingons are on in the opening of the episode. The Talarians are first mentioned in this episode. The race was created to be the owners of this freighter, and then we never actually see them until TNG Season 4, the episode Suddenly Human. That's the story about the boy who was raised by another species. The Talarians raised him. They were at war with the Federation, and it's very similar to Worf. They find this orphan baby, and they take him and raise him as one of their own, and he becomes a member of their military. And then all of a sudden, Picard. This hadn't happened yet in real life, but it kind of becomes what was his name? Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban kid who was like, oh, like, do we turn him over to his family or do we keep him here? Like, what do we do? It was kind of similar to that, but those were the Talarians. It was actually Mike Okuda's idea that it was like, oh, why don't we just make the species one of the people we've mentioned before but have never seen? So, and they also mentioned the Merculite rockets in that episode, I believe, which is the weapons they said they used to fight off the Ferengi that they didn't fight.
Huh. I did notice, by the way, Patrick Stewart at one point, I think, mispronounced it as like Torellians or something like that. Right,
which is also another species that gets mentioned. But there's like Torellians to Larians. There's like a bunch of like T aliens and
there's Captain Terrell.
Yeah, they really like those letters.
Yeah.
They also really like the model used for the Talarian freighter because it gets reused a lot in Star Trek. It actually shows up again in 2 episodes after this. It's in the episode Symbiosis, and we've seen it as recently as in Star Trek Lower Decks. It's in the season 3 episode Crisis Point 2. And they also reused that model in TNG for Okana's ship, the Erstwhile. So when we see Okana's ship in Star Trek Prodigy, it's that same Talarian model. But the studio model they use, they tweak it, they customize it, they build some different designs out of it. It eventually becomes the Antares class freighter, which is used a lot in Star Trek, including Cassidy Yates's cargo ship in Deep Space Nine was the modified model of the Talarian freighter.
That is a very handy ship. It's a good looking ship.
Yeah,
it looks utilitarian.
It looks real and practical and not particularly memorable enough that you're going to recognize it every time they reuse it. So.
Right.
Yeah, it looks very practical, very functional.
Yeah, I like it. Speaking of things they reuse, Geordi's visor vision, that was kind of similar to the season 7 episode Interface when Geordi is remote controlling a probe, seeing through its perspective instead of through his visor, and also in the movie Star Trek Generations, Dr. Soren hacks Geordi's visor so that the Duras sisters can use it to spy on the Enterprise. However, Dr. Soren was able to make it just give a clear picture, so Picard would have had an easier time with this. And as I mentioned, this was Vaughn Armstrong's first role in Star Trek, but he has played the most Star Trek characters in live action out of any actor. He's played either 11 or 12 characters. I don't know. Does Mirror Universe, if you play Admiral Forrest in the Prime Universe, but you also play Mirror Universe Forrest, does that count as a different character?
I say yes.
Yeah. Okay, if you count that, then he's played 12 characters. But I mean, that also means like Avery Brooks has played 2 characters because he was Mirror Universe Cisco one time. So
yeah, sure. He's honestly his Mirror Universe character is very different from his regular character.
Yeah,
so.
it is a very different performance. So okay, fair enough. We will count that he has played 12 characters in live action. I think if you count like animation, I think James Doohan has done more than 12 voices in the animated series.
Yeah.
But he's
Pretty
done
impressive.
the most out of live action. Yeah, and always characters that only appear in a single episode until he got to Enterprise, and he got to be recurring characters with Admiral Forrest, and also what were they called? The aliens who got mad that Archer's dog peed on their tree, but he shows up as that guy twice. But here's some fun casting. The Klingon Kanevis, who dies early in the episode, is played by actor Robert Bauer. Robert Bauer was a drummer in the band The Watch that Michael Dorn played bass for. So they were bandmates, and then they got to be Klingons in this episode together. So
that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
He gave a howl to his bandmate.
And shout out to our friend Larry Nemechek's book, The Star Trek Next Generation Companion, which is where I learned this factoid.
Nice.
And as Dave was pointing out, the uniforms in this episode, looking how the Klingon uniforms looked in the Star Trek movies in the 80s. And yeah, they are basically exactly identical to the uniforms worn in Star Trek 3. So Klingon Defense Force did not up... It's kind of like the Monster Maroons lasted for so many decades. Because like from the Wrath of Khan to like Picard's younger days, they had like the Monster Maroon in that entire like the what we call the Lost Era, where like the Section 31 movie takes place, even though
They're
we didn't
good
see any
looks.
Monster Maroons there. But
They're
yeah,
just good looks.
we can assume that the Klingons also didn't upgrade their uniforms throughout that entire time as well. But agreed, it is a good look. And the Klingon death ritual, I was shocked to actually count the number of times we see it after this, but no one does it other than Worf. So maybe it's something that like only like diehard like fundamentalist Klingons actually do. But Worf does it when he discovers Kalar's dead body in Reunion. He does it when his next lover to be killed, Jadzia, dies in Deep Space Nine. And then Worf also does it after he kills Galron, also in Deep Space Nine. He lets out a howl. It's interesting to me. I never thought about this either. But Worf kills Duras and doesn't give him the death howl. But he does give Galron one after he kills him. So Worf respects Galron more than Duras, which makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because they have like a frenemies kind of thing sometimes. Like sometimes they're friends and they get along, and then sometimes
Worf put Galron on the throne by killing Duras.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
He put him on and he took him off. And I thought this was fun, but the security officer Ramos, he's the first one to drop after the Klingons break free from the brig, but he was a stuntman who appeared a few times in TNG season 1, season 2, and then in season 3 he actually becomes the stunt coordinator for the show. Dennis, I don't know if it's Madelone or Madelone. I've only ever seen it written, but I've seen him in like documentaries and stuff. He's in the Deep Space Nine, What We Left Behind documentary. He was the stunt coordinator on DS9 and Voyager both, and he's played a bunch of characters also himself, or at least like done the stunts for a lot of characters. But he's the guy in the documentary. He talks about like how hard it was being in the Jem'Hadar prosthetics out in the desert, and how like all of his stuntmen were like passing out and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did a lot of work for Star Trek in the Berman era. So shout out to Dennis. And the Worf Foster family that is mentioned in this episode, his parents and his brother, we end up meeting all of those people over the course of Deep Space Nine. In the season 4 episode Family, we meet his parents, Sergei and Helena. And in season 7, we meet his brother, Nikolai.
Paul Sorvino.
And some fun reuse of stock footage. The Klingon Katinga cruiser, beautiful design. Taylor always calls it the ship with the hat, because it does kind of look like it's wearing a sombrero when it's coming towards you. But
it's cute.
That's footage that from the motion picture that they also reuse in the Kobayashi Maru simulator in The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite ship designs, and when I see that, I'm like, oh shit, stuff's going down.
Yeah, it has a menacing look to it. I like the curvature of the arms, like the wings
Mm-hmm.
on them. It's very much like, I'm coming after you.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
very aggressive, and you got to give credit to original Enterprise designer Matt Jeffries, who also designed the Klingon D7 that was upgraded into the Katinga for the movies.
Oh yeah. The sort of wings on it are like, like when a cobra's frill is popping up on its neck.
Mm-hmm.
And as Dave was pointing out, the also from the motion picture, but the Jerry Goldsmith Klingon music is reworked by Ron Jones in this episode. So I think you really hear it during the Klingon prison escape when they get out of the brig. But that's
When I hear it, I have to root for the Klingons in the moment, no matter what they're doing.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's like you're like Worf. It like stirs something in your warrior blood.
That's right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm about to start singing like that episode of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, we don't get any war songs in this episode, but that is to come. In
The howl is fits in with that. All of that fits into the idea, that sort of old world idea of the warrior poet too. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're loud. They're noisy. Klingons like to be loud. So
Yeah.
I can relate. But that's all I got for Gorn Eggs. But y'all just heard us talk about this episode for over an hour, so you know what we think about it. We would love to hear what folks out there think about Heart of Glory, so please leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify or wherever. You can sound off in the Tex-Trek Discord server. Let us know what you think about it, and we might share that next week. Right now, we have some subspace transmissions we received from last week's episode when we discussed Spock's brain. So I'm just going to read through some of. Or Taylor, do you want to read some of the subspace transmissions?
Oh, sure. Give me one second.
Is that readable on your screen?
I have to make my screen larger, so stand by.
I can
I
read
had
this
it in
one.
split screen. Okay, there we go.
Oh, do you want to take this one? This one is from YouTube.
Okay, so at Mark Malio 9180 says, 2 subtle aspects of this episode, Spock's brain. 1, they used rear projection on the bridge view screen, allowing actors to walk and talk in front of it. 2, Kirk looks twice at a non-existent chronometer in the bridge ceiling. In the 3rd season, they tried to make the view screen more technical. In The Lights of Zatar, another winner, the view screen acts like a radar screen tracking the Zatarians.
I never connected Spock's brain to the Lights of Zatar, but yeah, they do in season 3 do try to get some more use out of the view screen. So that is kind of cool. You can say a lot of negative things about TOS season 3. You can say a lot of negative things about Spock's brain, and they're very valid. But they were trying to get some cool use out of the view screen. So from a technical standpoint, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, there's some good catches.
And on Twitter, we had some thoughts from our friend Sub Commander Tall. He says, the disembodied brain is classic pulp sci-fi trope, but it takes on a new valence when you realize this episode was filmed only a few months after the first heart transplant. I think I might have heard that at one point and forgotten it, so thank you so much, Sub Commander, for bringing that up. I think that's an interesting point to bring up about Spock's brain. But he goes on to say, that said, I don't like this episode very much. I mean, it's borderline camp in moments. I think it's full-on camp in moments. Mm-hmm. But he also says, although I will say I love the planet discussion between Kirk, Sulu, Chekhov, and Uhura on the bridge. It's a unique moment in TOS when they're trying to figure out which of these 3 planets do we go to. And that's also using like the cool rear projection on the view screen. So, and then Taylor, do you want to take this next one also from Twitter?
Sure.
These next 2.
Yes. So S.E. Solomon says, it's actually not the worst. Any episode with children or Native Americans are the worst. And Pierre Brousseau says, far from the worst. Savage Curtain parentheses with Adam Lincoln, is the worst. Spock,
Abraham
help me,
Lincoln.
Spock. Abraham Lincoln, I'm sorry. Far from the worst. Savage Curtain with Abraham Lincoln is the worst. Spock, help me, Spock. And then like a sad, disgruntled, rolling eyes emoji.
That was the original Kalis who did impressions.
Yeah.
Secretly wanted to be a ventriloquist.
The TNG clone of Kalis didn't do a single impression, so he did not impersonate anyone's voice. But the version that the Excalbians created in the Savage Curtain, he could impersonate. Yeah, that's interesting that like Klingon Jesus wanted to be a ventriloquist, I guess. And then also on Twitter, Felix Binkenstein says, not even close to be the worst episode of Star Trek, not even the worst episode of TOS, that's Turnabout Intruder. So a lot of people don't like Spock's brain, but they seem to agree there are worse episodes out there.
It's they're united in their in diverting that hate elsewhere.
What else were you saying, Dave, about a ventriloquist Kalis, I think?
I don't know.
Oh.
I was just riffing off what you were saying.
But I liked talking about Spock's brain last week. I liked talking about Heart of Glory this week. I'm curious what people are going to say about it now. But next week, Taylor and I will have Joel on board, and we are actually going to be talking about an episode of the animated series. So going back to some 1970s animation, but the episode that I frequently call the most metal episode of Star Trek. I'm a bit of a metal head, and I am very excited to announce we will be discussing the Magics of Megas 2. This was not my choice. This was actually another like Taylor pick. So
You need to stop telling people that I'm picking all these episodes.
you didn't pick all. You just picked the first 3. The one we're doing after that, I don't want to say what it is yet, but I think it's one I came up with. But yeah, we will have Joel on board talking about the Magics of Megas 2. It's where the Enterprise crew, they go to the center of the galaxy and they meet the devil, and then Spock learns how to perform dark magic, and it's cool.
I'm so excited.
I love it. I'm excited too. I can understand how some people might think, oh, that's like the dumbest shit ever, but I mean, I have fun with it. I love it. So I'm really hyped for that. Looking forward to that. I hope everyone comes back.
Every franchise, Fatheree, has that like some out there camp moments if it lasts long enough. And you're either a person who thinks it's the dumbest thing ever, or you kind of embrace it. I was just thinking of the Spider-Man 3 from the Raimi movies when Tobey Maguire does his evil dance, evil goth Tobey. I'm like, that is some magic, I think.
Yeah,
but
no, I love that too.
But I know it is not universally beloved.
Yeah, but infinite diversity and infinite combinations. That's what we're all about.
That's
So
right.
yeah, we'll have a conversation about Magics of Megas 2 next week. And until then, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Subscribe to YouTube to watch the Tex-Trek podcast live or listen to us later on your favorite podcast platform. Follow Stephen Fatheree on socials at TXTrek. Thank you and take care.